Hello, class, and welcome to week two. Week two, we're going to go over Windows Object and Access Controls, chapter 3, and we're also going to go over chapter 4, which is sorry, is Microsoft Windows Encryption Tools and Technologies. So, starting out with chapter 3, um, Access Controls, Microsoft Windows. The learning objective for this week is to implement security controls to protect Microsoft Windows systems and networks. Like I said previously last week, the course does focus on Windows, but you can extrapolate a lot of the theory and techniques to the other operating systems, including Linux and Macintosh or Apple. So the key concepts are the principles of least privilege. We'll go over different access models, look at Microsoft Windows objects and access controls, look at different forms of identification, and look at Windows access permissions and access management tools. Later on in the week, I'll add a video on Linux access controls as well, which is interesting if you have not ran across it. Security control process is an ongoing process where we evaluate where we currently are, think about what we should do, make a plan, design that plan, and implement that plan, and then continually evaluating where we are today and making changes to improve our security posture. So the principle of least privilege, the definition per the Orange Book is to grant each subject in a system the most restrictive set of privileges or the lowest clearance needed to perform authorized tasks. It limits the damage that can result from an accident, error, or unauthorized use. For example, if you are have root access, you can cause a lot of damage to to a system. And the Orange Book has been replaced with a common criteria for IT security evaluation. Try to bring up these notes so you can see the author's notes as well. We're going through the lecture. Let me bring up this video I wanted to show you. Try to bring some videos, just make it a little more visual.
Are you an IT admin still relying on spreadsheets to track your valuable equipment? Just like you.
Least privilege restricts privileged account access for users, applications, and services, granting them just enough access to complete specific authorized tasks. In doing so, it helps prevent overprivileged access, which could allow exploitation to occur if credentials are compromised. The key benefits of implementing least privilege include reduced attack surface, limited risk, demonstrable compliance, lower costs, and empowered employees who can perform their tasks without roadblocks. Least privilege also reduces the burden of responsibility on employees and reduces the risk of cyber fatigue. Before implementing least privilege, you should take these important steps. Discover all admin and local admin privileges, inventory all your devices and software, monitor privileges and learn their usage, and replace privileges with automation policies. Implementing least privilege involves auditing existing privileges, setting default permissions to the lowest level, separating privileges, and using just-in-time elevated permissions when required.
So the just-in-time permissions is an important concept. And as a root admin,
hi there.
Welcome. I firmly believe in this, and we log in with our own user ID, and then as we need root access, we just use a sudo to for that specific task that's being performed. So Windows principle of least privilege is implemented at the user account level. And Microsoft refers to user accounts defined using the principle as least privileged user accounts, or LUAs. And it's recommended to implement least privilege, create user groups that represents roles in the organization. And we'll see the user groups. Here's some sample Active Directory groups. And so, we'll go further in this in just a couple slides, but it's easier to create roles instead of managing every single user. So, for example, administrators are going to need to have server write access. Guests will need the least access to your system. Remote desktop users, you may want to set them up, so they have to go through a VPN and they have they can't access as wide as footprint. And, and you can set it up by, how the organization is set up as well, which we'll see in just a second, like HR or QA or development. So rights of permission, each group in Windows has the ability to apply rights of permission to sets of users. User rights are defined and maintained through group security policy objects, and permissions applied to specific objects and are maintained through each object security settings. Each object has access control rules and an ACL, access control list for that object. ACLs and Active Directory are made up of a list of access control entries. ACLs that Windows uses are implemented as discretionary access control. So list of access control rules is discretionary access, or DACL. And each entry in the DACL is an access control entry, or an ACE. And access control lists are commonly used. Show you a video on that just to get a little more in depth. It's already brought up.
Welcome to MCSI. My name is Erica. In this video, we will discuss some concepts about access control lists on Windows. Let's start with understanding what access control lists are. Computers running Windows were designed to be multi-user systems. For every file and program on that computer, the administrator can configure the level of access a user would have to it. For example, one user can only read a file, whereas another user can read a file and write to it. An access control list, or ACL, formally defines the read, write, and execute permissions that a user or a group has on a file or a program. When a file is created, a default access control list is assigned to it. It can be modified by the system administrator. Since the ACL contains the security information for a file or program, it is also referred to as security descriptor. Now, I will demonstrate how you can view access control lists in the user LAN. Let's consider the program notepad.exe. Right-click on the file and select Properties. Navigate to the Security tab. Here, we can view the list of user and groups who can use this program. Click on a user or group and view the permissions assigned to them here. This constitutes the access control list, or ACL, for the Notepad program. Using the command prompt, the command ISOL can be used to view the ACL associated with a file or program. Next, we will view the ACL of the Notepad binary in kernel LAN. Notepad is currently running on my computer. The binary is in execution, so we will view the ACL of the Notepad process. Before we begin observing access control lists in the kernel LAN, let us understand some concepts. When a program is in execution, in the kernel LAN, an object header is added to it. This object header contains a field called as SD, or security descriptor, that contains the access control list associated with that program. In the kernel LAN, we will first find the address of the program, then find the address of the object header, and find the address of the security descriptor to view its contents. Let's begin. I am already running Windows Debugger in kernel debugging mode. Notepad is currently running on this computer. Let's find the address the Notepad process is present at. Here it is. We will pass this value to the object command to find the address of the object header. We will copy this value. The next step is to find the address of the security descriptor within this header. For this, we will use this command. Here, we can find the address within the header where the security descriptor for Notepad is present. I will copy it and paste it as input to the SD command. To view the information, and an operation with -10 must be performed. Why? A detailed explanation for this is beyond the scope of this video. For now, we can understand that as we are working in kernel land, we are dealing with data in bits and bytes. This an operation is performed to interpret the information present in the security descriptor. Here, we can view the access control list associated with the Notepad binary. Each item is referred to as an access control entry. Here, you can find information about whether the access is allowed or denied. Following this, you can find some flags, size of the access control entry, and the security identifier or SID of the user for whom this entry is relevant. To map the SID to a user, run this command in the terminal. I will tell you why knowing about Windows access control lists is important for malware reverse engineering. Cyber adversaries sometimes set or modify the access control information associated with files and binaries to enable malicious behavior. When a reverse engineer is aware of the internals of ACL, it helps greatly when analyzing malware. I highly encourage researching about the internals of ACL to know more about security descriptors, security identifiers, access control entries, access control flags and masks, etc. I hope you have a good idea now about how access control lists exist on a Windows computer. If you like this video, please hit like and share.
Right, great. Yeah, access control lists are extremely important in the Windows world.
So what is ClickUp? ClickUp is an all-in-one productivity software where you can manage everything and
just
Hi there.
queuing up the next one. So that's our access control list, and I'll show you in it. And of course, you're going to do this in the lab, but I know you just saw it in the video. But you can go and you can look at the properties of we're looking at test.rtf properties, and we can see what groups or users have access to it and what kind of access they have. Let's see, access model is user validation. The user enters an ID and authentication credentials. Windows compares this displayed info to the stored info. If there's match, the user is authenticated. Windows records the user SID, the SID of each group, and the user privileges in a token. And a set is created and contains the user group SIDs and attached to each process the user runs. So Windows prompts the user to enter the ID and authentication credentials, username and password. There's also hello and other ways that you can authenticate. Windows looks up the defined user and associated authentication information. And if they match, the user is authenticated. The operating records the user's security ID, identifier, and the SID of the group which the user is assigned. And then the user privileges is in a token. And the token or the SAT with all the user groups SIDs is attached to the process that the user is running. Let's see this in the next slide. So security access token or the SAT is user SID, the group SID, list of privileges, and any other access information. And I got to queue that up on the access tokens. Yes.
Welcome to MCSI. My name is Erica. In this video, we will discuss some concepts about Windows access tokens. Have you watched another video on our channel on users and groups on a Windows computer? I highly recommend that you watch it before proceeding with this video. You can find the link to it in the description box below. We will start with understanding what access tokens are. They describe security information for processes and threads on a computer. Processes are started by a user or the system and are assigned the relevant security identifier. The process started by a user is typically assigned specific privileges to perform a task. Privilege refers to the right to carry out a task. Information about the security identifier and privileges are stored in the token. Here are some examples or privileges. When a process is assigned the load driver privilege, it can load or unload kernel-level drivers. A process with the machine account privilege can create new user accounts on a system. A process with the shutdown privilege can initiate a system reboot. A process contains the list of possible privileges it can have. However, a privilege must be enabled for use. In some cases, it is enabled by default when the process starts, and in other cases, it must be explicitly enabled. The keywords default and enabled are referred to as privilege attributes. Now, let's view the access tokens associated with a process in user land. This can be done using Process Explorer. Let us view the access token information for the command prompt application. Right-click and select Properties. Navigate to the Security tab. Here is the security identifier of the user who started the command prompt application. These are the security identifiers of the system groups associated with this process. These are the privileges used by this process. However, only one is enabled. I encourage you to research about the purpose of Windows privileges. Next, let's observe access token information in kernel land. I have Windows Debugger running in kernel debugging mode. Let's view process information for the command prompt application. The second number here indicates the level of information to display. It is a flagged value. With 1, you can view token information. Here, you can find the address where the access token is present. Click on it to view the token information for command prompt. You can find information about the security identifier of the user and groups associated, followed by information about the enabled privileges, and more. In the video on users and groups, we used another technique to view the token information for a process. It is a great idea to be aware of multiple techniques to perform the same task. Let's view the token information for another process. Notepad application that is running as the administrator. Here is the process information. Let us view the token. The process was started by user 10. With admin privileges. We can find a bigger list of privileges with 3 of them enabled. I encourage you to research about the other fields in the token structure. Do you have a good idea now about how access tokens exist? Malware samples sometimes misuse access tokens to perform lateral movement on a network or to escalate privileges on a host. Knowing the internals of access tokens and how the various fields of information can be interpreted will help provide more information about a malware's behavior. If you liked this video, please hit like and share this video on social media. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive more videos like this one. Join our online community of students learning useful cybersecurity.
All right. So yeah, security access token, can be very in-depth when you first learn it, but it's pretty easy to access. And like she said in the video, there's multiple ways to do things in Windows. So just be aware of that. Windows Server 2012 to 2019 Dynamic Access Control describes a collection of features to describe user and data attributes. Attributes help Windows protect files using policies that provide more access control. And DAC is used to identify and classify data, control file access, audit file access, and imply encryption to sensitive documents. So identify and classify data. You can tag data either automatically or manually to tell Windows how to secure different data types. You can look for special data types like social security numbers, telephone numbers, addresses. Control file access. Central access policies allow organizations to set global rules on who can access different data types. Audit file access. DAC includes central audit policies that provide the ability for auditors and forensic investigators to find out who access sensitive information. And apply encryption in sensitive documents. Automatic Rights Management Services, RMS, can encrypt files and contain tag sensitive data without requiring user interaction. So, of course, in a corporate environment, automating security is usually the best way to go. User access control. Administrators group has split SAT. One part has full privileges. Another part is more limited to it, like a normal user. Processes initially run using limited SAT and then elevate to administrator as needed. If a process requires a privilege that is allowed for administrators, the process will also contain administrator SAT, and Windows will prompt the user for escalation confirmation. You'll see this in the lab in just a second right here. So you can see, this process, enter an admin username and password. And so, in this case, it's administrator, and you would need to enter password. So Windows feature prompting users for escalating administrative problems called user account control, or UAC. Each time the process needs to access to an object when it refers to process as SAT, and the object's dynamic access control list to see if the access request is allowed. If the access request is allowed, the process accesses the object. If the access request is not allowed, Windows returns an error and the process cannot be completed without requested object access. Once Windows builds SAT and attaches it to a process, the SAT becomes the subject part of the authorization process. And before granting access to an object, Windows must first authorize the request. Windows uses the DACL defined for an object to decide whether the access request will be granted or denied. So, in user access control settings, they're saying, of course, with a lot of things, Windows it's a little bit better. This has more choices, our comfort levels, and depending on, they say, your familiarity with Windows, and of course, in a work environment, this can be set low, but on your home machine, you can set this up yourself and choose when to be notified about changes on your computer, and always notify me to never notify me. And that includes like going into Windows settings and installing applications. So sharing SIDs and SATs. The SAT for each process is built from the user's SID and group SIDs. Active Directory stores shared information to construct the SATs. Domain controllers send security information to the computer when a user logs on. Windows extends concept of authentication to the computer level when constructing SATs, and complete SATs are never shared across the network, only the part necessary to construct the SAT. Of course, because you don't want people to steal it. But so we have distributed SATs when we have multiple domain controllers in a network. You can see our domain controller is building the user SID and the group SID, and where the resource is, we use the local group SIDs, and then the complete SID is a combination of our domain, user, group, and our local. So the domain controller stores the domain's user SID and the SIDs, all the groups that the user assigned. The target server, or the server where the resource resides, already has a local group list where the user has defined the local rights definitions, and the domain controller sends the domain user and the group SIDs to the target server using one of their two authentication protocols. So, as a network administrator, we use service accounts, and you don't want to set up processes to run on any automated processes, especially at admin level, to run on real users' accounts. So you do service accounts, especially in server 2012 and newer, can be shared across systems. Administrators create these accounts to manage domain accounts that provide automatic password management. It allows Windows Server and newer domain controllers to manage passwords automatically at the domain level. And got a video on by Bert Levins on the privileged access management. Not too long. Like I said, these videos aren't too long, but I think they do help, expand the material and also
In today's digital landscape, ensuring the security and efficiency of IT infrastructure is paramount. One critical component often overlooked is the management of service accounts. Service accounts are specialized user accounts that operate without human intervention. They facilitate essential background tasks and automated scripts, ensuring seamless operations within an organization's computing environment. However, neglected service accounts can pose significant security risks. Let's explore the dangers of poor service account management. Firstly, security breaches. Weak or misconfigured service account credentials can be exploited by attackers, leading to unauthorized access to critical systems and sensitive data. Secondly, insider threats. Without proper oversight, service accounts can be abused by malicious insiders, allowing them to bypass security controls and carry out unauthorized actions. Thirdly, compliance violations. Regulatory frameworks like GDPR and HIPAA mandate strict controls over privileged accounts, including service accounts. Non-compliance can result in hefty fines and legal penalties. And lastly, operational disruptions. Mismanaged service accounts can lead to downtime and disruptions in business processes, significantly impacting productivity. Effective management of service accounts is crucial. Here are some best practices to ensure security and operational efficiency. Implement strong password policies. Enforce complex passwords for service accounts and regularly update them. Utilize password management tools to securely store and manage credentials. Employ the least privilege principle. Grant service accounts only the minimum level of access necessary for their functions. Regularly review and audit access permissions to ensure they align with business needs. Enable multi-factor authentication, or MFA. Adding an extra layer of security, MFA requires additional verification steps for account access, significantly reducing the risk of unauthorized access. Regularly monitor and audit activity. Use robust monitoring tools to track service account usage and detect suspicious behavior. Conduct regular audits to identify potential security incidents or policy violations. Automate lifecycle management. Implement automated processes for provisioning, updating, and deprovisioning service accounts. Ensure timely removal of inactive or obsolete accounts to reduce the attack surface. Insights from cybersecurity emphasize staying informed about the latest threats and implementing strong password management practices. Experts advocate for multi-factor authentication and regular security assessments to safeguard service accounts. By following these expert recommendations, organizations can significantly enhance their security protocols. Implementing strong password policies, enforcing the principle of least privilege, enabling MFA, and automating lifecycle management are crucial steps. Proper service account management not only prevents unauthorized access and data breaches, but also ensures compliance with industry regulations and standards like GDPR, HIPAA, and PCI DSS. This proactive approach demonstrates a commitment to protecting sensitive data and maintaining the trust of stakeholders. Service account management is a fundamental aspect of cybersecurity and IT operations. By implementing robust management practices, organizations can significantly reduce the risk of unauthorized access, data breaches, and compliance violations. Secure your service accounts to safeguard your organization's critical systems and data, ensuring a thriving digital-first world. Stay secure, stay efficient. Implement robust service account management today.
In the digital world, certain accounts have more power than others. These are called privileged accounts, and they can access highly sensitive data, control IT systems, and configure network devices.
Just watch this.
From administrators to executives, these accounts are critical to your organization's infrastructure. But What happens if they fall into the wrong hands? A compromised privileged account can lead to catastrophic data breaches, financial losses, and irreparable damage to your reputation. That's where Privileged Account Management, PM, comes in. Robust security solutions ensure that all privileged access is tightly controlled. Using advanced monitoring, multi-factor authentication, and behavioral analytics to ensure that only the right people can access you. Regular audits, strict access controls, and the principle of least privilege are just the beginning. With our security protocols, you can prevent unauthorized access and detect potential threats before they become a problem. Empower your organization with the tools it needs to protect its most critical assets.
Oops.
FBI alert, China.
So yeah, service accounts are used way beyond just Windows. And we use them in just about every application, in our and so managing them is extremely critical to our organization. Looking at Kerberos is one of the ways we handle authentication. We use a domain controller. A client requests from the KDC, the domain controller requests a access ticket, then they use the access ticket to connect to a server to gain access. So it's a fast and scalable protocol, allows for secure exchange of information. Each domain controller functions as a Kerberos key distribution system, or KDC. When a subject requests an object, the subject asks the DC for an access ticket. The DC is one who authenticates the subject, and if they successfully authenticate, then they provide the subject's SID and to the targeted public server, and then with access ticket, they can get the resource that they're requesting from. Since the access ticket was encrypted with the server's public key, the server can decrypt it with its own private key. And successful decryption means the ticket is valid and the server evaluates the SID for access information. And this is the last video for chapter 3. Copy it and show you. It's a quick one.
How Kerberos works. Hi, I'm Don Jones, and as you probably know, Kerberos is the native authentication protocol in Active Directory, so it's used by Windows networks everywhere, but it's surprising how few people really know how the protocol works. And if you're going to understand some of Active Directory's more advanced concepts like delegation and so forth, it's important to understand what's going on under the hood in Kerberos. So let's dive in. So in any authentication situation, you really have three different parties that are involved. The first is the client. Now, sometimes that's a client computer, but more frequently it's an actual user who's sitting at that computer and trying to access resources. Then there's the resource that they're trying to access. In this example, it'll be some files on a file server. And there's the KDC, the Key Distribution Center. Now, in an Active Directory network, that's an Active Directory domain controller. And this is the guy that really kind of brings everybody together. Interestingly, in Kerberos, there's no communication between the resource and the KDC. There doesn't need to be. The client actually takes on the majority of the processing burden in Kerberos, which kind of distributes that authentication workload across the network. But it does so in a way that's secure and trustworthy, as we're going to see. So things kick off when the client attempts to actually log on to the network. Here's how that works. The client constructs an authenticator. Now that's a special little package that says, here's who I claim to be, and some other information, including the date and the time. Now, those authenticators are only good for a certain period of time. That way they can't be captured and then replayed back on the network by an attacker. So this will represent that authenticator. Now, a portion of that is unencrypted, the user's name and so forth. That way, when this gets sent off, the KDC or domain controller can see who's trying to authenticate. But a portion of it is encrypted using the user's password. So that's what this pink key will represent, and that's what this pink lock will represent, that the user's password, which is known to the user, has been used as an encryption key. This is an important concept because it emphasizes the fact that Kerberos doesn't transmit your password across the network. It uses it as a shared secret. Now, shared secret simply means that when this thing is sent off to the domain controller can open it up and it can see in clear text, okay, this is who that user claims to be. I'm going to go in my database and look up what I think their password is and see if I can use it to decrypt the authenticator. If I can't, well, then this was clearly encrypted with a password other than the one I know about, so this user isn't who they say they are. If I can decrypt it, though, then this user must be who they say they are because they've got the correct password. So from this point, I don't need that authenticator anymore. It can actually just completely go away. Instead, I'm going to create a ticket granting ticket, or a TGT. Now, I, as the domain controller, have my own encryption key that I'm going to use to encrypt a portion of this TGT. I've already gone through the laborious process of looking up this user and making sure they are who they say they are. So I'm going to save all that information in here, but I'm going to encrypt it using a key that only I know. Then I'm going to transmit this whole thing back to the client, and they're going to store it in a special area of memory called the Kerberos tray. Now that's an area of memory that cannot be swapped out to disk. It always lives in memory. That way if the computer crashes, this information hasn't been saved anywhere persistent. Okay, so now the client is logged on, they're ready to go, and they're ready to get to something on a file server. So my computer looks at my Kerberos tray and says, well, you don't have a ticket for the file server. So we're going to go back to the key distribution center, and what we're going to do is send it this ticket granting ticket along with a request. Hey, I need a ticket for the file server. The key distribution center, the domain controller, does not have to look up my information again. It simply uses its key to decrypt the TGT that it gave me earlier. If it decrypts successfully, then it knows that this is the information it generated itself previously. Now, these ticket granting tickets are usually good for 8 hours by default, so periodically they will have to be destroyed and renewed. That way the domain controller gets an opportunity to revalidate my identity, but it doesn't have to do that every time, which saves it some effort. So the client actually does keep a copy of this in its Kerberos tray. It sent a copy off to the domain controller. The domain controller knows who I am now and can thus generate a ticket. Now, here's the cool thing. Because this file server is also a domain member, the domain controller has its logon password, which it uses to encrypt this ticket. Now, there's no communication to the file server itself. Instead, this ticket is created by the domain controller and given to the client, who stores it in the Kerberos tray. Now, for the next 8 hours, while that ticket is still good, anytime the client needs to access something on that file server, all it has to do is create a copy of that ticket and send it to the file server. The file server says, I have no idea who you are. I've never seen you before, so I'm going to use my password, which I know, to try and decrypt this ticket. If I'm able to do so, then this ticket must have been generated by the KDC because that's the only other person that knows my password. That tells me, the file server, that this is a legitimate ticket. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that. I'll open it up. That'll tell me your username and what groups you're a member of, and I'll use that information to decide what you're allowed to access. And every time you come back to me, Mr. Client, you're going to need to resend me a copy of this certificate. That way I, the file server, don't have to store all this garbage in memory. Because the file server is working with hundreds, potentially thousands of users. If it had to keep all those tickets, it would be a huge pain in the neck. So there's actually a command line utility you can get, or a Windows utility called KerbTray. It's in the resource kit. It's available for download on the internet. And it lets you view this Kerberos tray so you can see all of the tickets that a client has gathered. So this is how authentication works. The client goes to the KDC to get the ticket, and then it stores them and presents them to a file server. And that's how the whole Kerberos protocol really works. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.
All right, great. Yeah, so these concepts, like when you first see them, they can be
when I use this bowel emptying ritual for constipation.
Stop this. It can be a little in depth, but like I said, that's the last one for chapter 3. And we still got a few slides to go through. Windows objects and access controls. Common secureable objects include our files and folders, NTFS, our pipe named and unnamed, our processes and threads, our registry keys, Windows services, printers, both locally and remote, our network shares, and our job objects. So we need to control access to all of these objects. Our Windows DACLs, secureable object requires a DACL for Windows to control access to the object. A DACL is a collection of individual ACEs and can be modified in the object's property dialog box. And you'll be doing this in the lab. But again, you can see the properties of this hello world file. And you can see full control, modify, read, and execute, read, write, and special permissions. And that depends on the type of file it is, whether or not the special permissions. So special indicators ACE for the user group is defined on the advanced page. So you would go to the advanced page. So course modifier allows the modification of the files and folders, read and execute, transfers to the folders, execute files, list folders, reads data. That's one of the things that's often missed is to execute. You got to be able to execute on a folder to see inside the folder. Read, list of folders, reads data, basic, and extended attributes and permissions, and write creates files and folders and writes data and basic extended attributes and read permissions. The DACL advanced permissions, you can see here we have full control. There's permissions, auditing, and effective access versus a predefined. SIDs, G group UIDs, and CL SIDs. You got the security identifier. Windows allow all user groups and computers have a unique SID and globally unique identifier that distinguishes objects that may originate from different computers and used to identify many different types of objects, including computers, web browsers, database record files, and application components. This class identifier is a Windows registry uses the GUID to identify the object and record its attributes, and then the GUIDs are stored as class identifier SIDs. An example of class identifier. And again, you'll see this again in the lab. Calculating Microsoft Windows access permissions. Windows resolves object access requests by the following procedure. Retrieves the user and group SIDs from the processes SAT, examines all ACs and the object's DACL for the request of permission, and if no DACL or SE is defined for requested access, window allows the access. If only one ACE exists for the requested access, access is based on whether the ACE is defined as allow or deny. And if multiple ACEs exist for the same requested access, the ACE must be defined as allow for Windows to allow for the access. Returns an access approval and denial based on the permission. Here's one in Windows that throws most people off because it has all ACEs must be defined as allow. So if you have one deny in a group and say you're in multiple groups, then you're going to be denied access. Windows object effective permissions. And so now this is a window where it's effective access, which is really nice because it used to not be there, in a few versions of Windows ago. But now, you can be in multiple groups and then your individual access, and then it'll show you your effective access. And so then you can go research why, what group they're in, they're denying access. Auditing and tracking Windows access. Auditing is the process of collecting performance information on which actions were taken and storing that information for later analysis. The first step is to enable auditing, tells Windows to record the events that will be defined for later analysis, and Windows stores audit event notes in the event logs. So our local audit policy is defined in this screen, and like I said, you'll be doing this on the in the lab, and you can set it up in your own machine. Expression-based security audit policy and server 2012 and newer, the DAC and the Windows Server enables administrators to create targeted audit policies using expressions based on user, computer, and resource claims. For example, You can audit everyone without a high security clearance who attempts to access highly sensitive documents. And it's a good idea to, audit who's accessing what resources on the network. So our access management tools include Calcs and iCalcs and RoboCopy. Best practices for Microsoft Windows access control is looking at your accounts, your global groups, your access controls, your local groups, and your permissions, or is reviewing those, or ACALP. That's an acronym they use. So in summary, we talked about the principal least privilege. We looked at access models. We looked at Microsoft Windows objects and access controls. We looked at different forms of identification. And then finally looked at Windows access permissions and access management tools. So that was chapter 3. Moving on to chapter 4, which is the encryption tools technologies. We'll go over BitLocker and the EFS and BitLocker to go. And then the lab will go over BitLocker. The discussion is, using BitLocker EFS. So the objective is to implement security controls to protect the Microsoft Windows system and network. Key concepts, we're going to go over BitLocker, BitLocker Go, EFS, encrypting file system, secure communication protocols. We'll look at security certificates, look at the public key infrastructure. So looking at encryption methods in Windows, we use access controls depending on the subjects using Windows to access secured objects. But an attacker could boot into another OS bypassing our access controls. So we need defense in depth. And we'll go over defense in depth again and again in this course. Extremely important to do a layer defense or defense in depth and try to get, attacks from the outermost service, but have more than one layer. So one level is encryption. So we can encrypt files, folders, and volumes. So Windows encrypted files cannot be booted into another operating system. Windows stores the decryption keys, and the encrypted data is useless to an attacker. Of course, with our ransomware, having encrypted data is really good, and having backups. So methods to encrypt store data is either BitLocker Go, EFS, or BitLocker Drive encryption as far as Windows is concerned. So with EFS, allows Windows users to encrypt files and entire folders. Can enable the encryption of files or folders by selecting a checkbox on the object property page. Again, you'll be doing that in lab. Uses a symmetric key partially derived from the user's password. The main drawback to EFS is that it is user-based. Each user must choose to enable or disable it on certain, the files and folders they choose. Here's an example of the object properties page, and you can see simple encrypt contents to secure the data. And just one thing, you can't compress and encrypt the data, 2 different algorithms. So BitLocker has 2 settings for each volume, either on and off. Cannot selectively choose which file folders to encrypt. Everything on that volume is encrypted. Only administrators can enable or disable encryption. Users cannot alter BitLocker settings. So this is one of the things for the discussion, should we use BitLocker for EFS? All but one BitLocker operation modules depend on the computer's trusted platform module, or TPM microchip, to manage and protect the key used for volume encryption and decryption. And I got a short, simply explained video, and they're pretty good to kind of drive this BitLocker feature home. So like I said, hopefully it will help.
How do celebrities like Justin Bieber and The Rock generate hundreds of millions of dollars? It's actually not.
In this video, we are going to take a look at BitLocker. We'll try to understand how BitLocker works, what is BitLocker, and why you should use BitLocker. We will also try to understand how to remove or unlock or crack BitLocker encryption, and how forensic investigators, that is digital forensic investigators, decrypt BitLocker encryption without the recovery key. So this video is a comprehensive summary of BitLocker, and it explains everything that you need to know about BitLocker, from using BitLocker to how BitLocker works and how to crack it or unlock it. So without wasting time, let's start with the video. In this episode of Simply Explained, we are going to talk about BitLocker. So what is a BitLocker? BitLocker is a computer hard drive encryption and security program released by Microsoft Corporation as a native application from Windows Vista, and it is available from Windows Vista Enterprise and Pro Edition to Windows 10 latest Pro editions. BitLocker is natively available in Windows 7 Enterprise and Ultimate Edition, Windows Vista Enterprise and Ultimate Edition, and Windows Server 2008 R2 and 2012 operating system versions. It is a hard drive security and encryption program that protects the drive's content and data from offline attacks. So what does the term offline attack means? So for example, if you have a flash drive or a hard drive, and if someone physically tries to unplug it from your computer and takes it home, for example, let's say your company creates softwares and application, it may be Android application, iOS application, or even Windows applications. So you might have source code on your computer. So one day a developer is fired and an employee is fired and removed from your company. Now the employee tries to take the hard disk home with him to sell the software, and all your source code is inside the hard disk. Now over here, if the company has used an encryption like BitLocker or even something like TrueCrypt, the hard disk won't be accessible by the employee and it will be locked and it cannot be opened. The data cannot be retrieved in any other computer. BitLocker is primarily designed to prevent a user's data or even a company's data from being viewed, extracted, or retrieved in case a drive is stolen. It doesn't protect a system when it's running because the online operation live protection is maintained by the operating system itself. A BitLocker is basically something that protects the data from being viewed, retrieved in another computer. BitLocker uses an AES encryption algorithm with 128-bit key and even 256-bit keys to encrypt disk drives, partition, volumes, and in fact flash drives. It protects the data when a hard drive is stolen and is being used on another computer, or when someone has physical access to the drive. To access the drive in an offline mode, BitLocker requires a security key known as the recovery key. BitLocker is generally aimed towards individual users who may fall prey to computer or laptop theft. By the way, this video was sponsored by EncryptionTools disk decryptor software, and EncryptionTools basically makes forensic investigation tools. So while investigating, you might have a drive which is encrypted with BitLocker and you might want to see the contents of the disk or the drives. So there are methods which are explained in our previous video via which you can remove or disable BitLocker encryption and even other encryptions like TrueVault and even TrueCrypt. EncryptionTools basically provides and develops softwares for forensic investigators and allows them to create and generate recovery key with memory dumps and various other methods. So a detailed video on how to use EncryptionTools disk decryptor for forensic investigation is available on this channel. So now let's try to understand how to use BitLocker, and before installing and using BitLocker, let's try to take a look at BitLocker's system requirements. To run BitLocker, you will need a Windows PC running on one of the OS flavors mentioned above, that is Windows Vista or above with Enterprise and Ultimate or Pro Edition. Plus, you also need a storage drive with at least 2 partitions and a trusted platform module, that is TPM. So TPM is basically a special chip that runs an authentication check on your hardware and software firmware. If the TPA detects an unauthorized change in your computer hardware, your PC will boot in restricted mode to determine the potential attackers. So for example, if an attacker tries to change your hard drive or even adds an extra hard drive to copy the data inside your computer, a TPA chip will basically restrict the hard disk use and will prevent a potential attack. If you don't know whether your computer has a TPA or multi-partition, don't sweat. You can just open up BitLocker and it will check the system requirements that are required to use BitLocker. Now let's try to learn how you can use BitLocker. Step 1 is to open Windows control panel and type BitLocker in the search box, or you can directly search it in the search bar. So you need to click on Manage BitLocker option and turn on BitLocker. Now BitLocker will check your PC's configuration to make sure you have supported Windows encryption method and if you have TPM module supported, and if it is off you need to turn it on in the BIOS. Now once TPM is turned on, which you can do in the BIOS by pressing F10, you can encrypt your drives, partition and even flash drives using BitLocker. So the method is quite simple. You need to choose either of the following options. You can use a smart chip called TPM, or you can use something known as recovery key and even save the recovery key file, which can be later used to decrypt the data. So that was all for BitLocker. In case if you want to learn more and if you are interested.
Great, yeah. So BitLocker, like I said, it's can be commonly used at the user level. Looking at the server manager features, where we can let's see, be looking at this in the lab as far as turning on BitLocker and turning it off. Install the new BitLocker drive encryption. So you go to features, select features on your local server, and then click on it. It tells you the description of it. Then confirm the installation and add the feature, and then do the install, and then it'll show you that the install is completed or the results. So like I said, you'll be doing that in the lab. BitLocker to Go is an extension to BitLocker that protects removable storage devices such as USB keys. You know, USB keys are not used as frequently as they used to, but my wife still use them, and she works in the healthcare industry. You can encrypt the entire device. You can use a password or smart card to encrypt data, and then enter the password or use a smart card to access the data. Got a short video on BitLocker to Go. It's only 2 minutes.
BitLocker is a Windows feature that helps protect your data from unauthorized access. It uses encryption and requires one or more authentication factors to unlock your computer. There are two types of BitLocker: device encryption and drive encryption. Beginning with Windows 8.1, BitLocker device encryption is available and turned on by default for all home or pro devices capable of modern standby. Most devices available today support this feature. When you first sign into or set up an eligible device with a Microsoft account, BitLocker automatically creates your recovery key and attaches it to your account. Your recovery key can also be attached to a work or school account. BitLocker Drive Encryption allows you to manually encrypt a specific drive or drives on a device running Windows Pro or Enterprise. This requires a compatible Trusted Platform Module chip, otherwise known as a TPM chip. Usually, drive encryption is manually enabled, but your work or school organization can also require this through its administrative policy. You can enable drive encryption through the control panel. In the Start menu, search BitLocker. Then, select Manage BitLocker. The drive you selected will begin the encryption process. This can take some time to complete, but you can continue to use your machine while it progresses. After BitLocker is enabled on your device, you might be prompted to enter your recovery key if Windows detects an unauthorized attempt to access your data. To learn more, check out our video on how to find your BitLocker recovery key. Need more help? Visit support.my.
All right, great. So that's BitLocker to Go. As far as enabling EFS, the folder encryption is recommended, but can be encrypt files. And the steps are go to Windows Explorer, navigate to the file or folder, right-click on it, click Properties, hit Advanced, and then select the Encrypt Contents and Secure Data checkbox. And again, you'll be doing that in the lab, and here you can see the screen to encrypt it. And again, you can't compress and encrypted data. Manipulate BitLocker login as admin, and Windows Explorer, navigate the computer, right-click on the desired volume. And so remember, we have to do BitLocker at the volume level and turn on BitLocker. Pick an authentication method and save the recovery key. Very, very important if you use it to, maintain and make backups of your recovery key. And there is a BitLocker management tool. And you can see this here, turn on BitLocker when we're selecting the volume level or the C drive. BitLocker management tool, you can see here's an example of a BitLocker management tool, and where it's on and off, both it's off, and then BitLocker is to go on a removable device. And then we can choose a password or use a smart card to unlock, and where we got to insert the smart card. So normally you're going to be using your password. Ensure the removable device is attached, your USB key, and then navigate the computer, right-click on the removable volume and turn on BitLocker. And then pick the authentication method and make sure you save the recovery key. And here's just a screen on showing that with a turn on BitLocker. And you're turning on BitLocker to go if it's a removable device, which in this case, it's the F drive. So encryption and communications. So that was BitLocker EFS and BitLocker to go. And like I said, we'll have discussion in the lab on those. Encryption and communication. Data encryption is as it placed on transmission media, encrypted from sending process to receiving process. The methods available to secure data transfer include encrypting individual messages or create an encrypted connection or a tunnel. Encryption provides its ability to hide data from unauthorized users, especially man-in-the-middle attacks. And what we do is we provide integrity and non-repudiation. And non-repudiation is that when I send you a message, I cannot repudiate. I cannot say I did not send that message and the message is not accurate. So it provides something for both sides. Oops. Back. So one of the ways to do this is with a shared secret key. So sender encrypts the data, and then the recipient decrypts the data. You can see it's ciphertext during the transmission. And so on our machine, it's not ciphertext. And once the recipient sees it, it turns into plain text. And we use the same key to encrypt the data. Then we share the key to encrypt and decrypt it. A couple of protocols. We can use TLS or transport layer security, formerly known as secure socket layer. We can also use VPN, which includes IPS or IPsec with layer 2 tunneling protocol, point-to-point tunneling protocol, and secure socket tunneling protocol. So our secure connection, we have a client or browser or server. We send a request, the server responds, we do the key exchange, we negotiate this cyber suite, and then we do the data transfer, our request and our get. And Internet IPS operates at a lower level than TLS SSL. It's used to provide encryption for IP4. Traffic encrypts traffic between the host, between host to host, and two networks, network, and between the gateway and a host. So our VPN, I have a video on this to show how a VPN works, but we're using our clients and we're going over a public network, but we're tunneling or we're encrypting the data as it reaches the other end. Of course, VPNs are extremely popular in business, especially more regulated businesses. I'm sure most of you are familiar, with using one as far as logging in. So
here is another free video from the Windows 7 course for the 7680 exam. In this video, I will look at BitLocker to Go.
Oops.
BitLocker to Go allows you to encrypt your USB drive.
Oh. Sorry, that's the wrong one. I'm looking at VPNs. I did add this video on BitLocker to Go, which is a little bit longer.
Is that if you lose,
and I'll put that in an announcement if you want to watch that.
What is VPN? I'm sure a lot of you have come across the term VPN when trying to access region-based content, right? Content that's blocked in your area, but you want to use it because it's available somewhere else. But have you ever understood what it actually is and how it works? I'm Pooja from IBM, and I'm here to explain what VPN is. VPN, Virtual Private Network. That's what VPN stands for. But what does it essentially mean here? So virtual meaning no hardware or cables. Private, talking about privacy, right? Which is very important when you're accessing the internet. And network, which is devices on the internet, right? And to go into the technical definition of VPN, what we have to see and understand is VPN establishes a secure digital connection, and meaning there is a secure tunnel where your data is actually transferred through, and this data is encrypted, and it also masks your IP address, thus preserving your anonymity in the web. What is an IP address, right? So IP address is an Internet Protocol address, and every device on the internet has a unique one associated with it, with which we identify the device. Let's understand the real-time use of VPN. Let's say there is a user, Sam, and Sam is in a coffee shop. He now realizes he forgot to send an important work email. So what he does, he connects to the public Wi-Fi that's there. And then he connects to the target web server, which could be the bank server, or it could be his work emails that he's trying to send. So it could be anything important that he forgot about through the day, right? What happens is Sam now sends all his data through the internet to the actual target web server. And this data has his IP address, his information like bank details, his work emails, his logins, all of those things. This is where something interesting happens. Now there is a hacker possibly observing all of this in a passive way. So he's probably trying to do a passive cyber attack here. So the next day, there is a possibility Sam's bank balance could be zero, or Sam's work emails are hacked. Anything can happen because the hacker now has information that is really important and for Sam's access for things, right? But what happens when we use a VPN? So this one is without VPN, right? So now let's see what happens when we actually use a VPN in this entire setup. That will help us understand how VPN is really important, right? So let's say now Sam has a VPN client. So he has installed it in his device. And now what the VPN does is it now creates a secure tunnel. So this secure tunnel actually transfers the information in an encrypted way. So the VPN has various protocols that it uses to encrypt this data, right? And now he actually goes to the VPN server. It doesn't go to the web server, if you notice that. So it goes to the VPN server here. And what the VPN server does is it decrypts the data. So it has the encryption key and it decrypts the data. And what the VPN server does is it puts its own IP address in the place of Sam's IP address. And now it connects to the actual web server, right? And what happens here in the secure tunnel, right? This is where all of the users, the ISP, not the users, the internet service provider, any government agencies that's tracking you, that's observing all your information, and advertisers, they are all looking at this information, right? So what they see is now a bunch of gibberish. So they cannot actually get any information about you to bombard you with ads. So that way, your information is preserved. With the IP being preserved, and when we switch out to the VPN's IP address, what the web server actually sees is the VPN's IP address and not your own IP address. So that way, your IP is masked or spoofed and your location is preserved. Now, when we spoke about the real-time example, remember about online streaming? Let's say Sam is in the US. he wants to access something that's available only in Europe. So he connects to the VPN server that's in Europe. And now the VPN server mimics as though Sam is in Europe itself, and he's able to access content that's available only for Europe users, right? So this is how VPN is being used almost on an everyday basis. So big companies use VPN, banks use VPN, employees from multinational corporations use VPN. So it's almost everywhere. And a lot of people use VPN even in their homes to protect their personal and private data, right? So there are many types of VPN prevalent now. The most important ones are like the remote access VPN and the site-to-site VPN. So I'm going to talk only about those two today. Remote access VPN is, as the word says, it's basically for remote access, meaning where, let's say, an employee of a company is traveling and he's commuting for work, for anything, doesn't matter to us. But he wants to access private resources and files from the private network of his company. All he has to do is he has to log into the VPN client with the secure credentials and then connect to the private network. Now he has access to all the resource files and the data that's there on the private network. And the next one is actually the site-to-site VPN. With the site-to-site VPN, this is mostly used by the large companies that's out there. Imagine they have multiple branches located in different locations, right? So they need something interlinked. They need network connectivity between these different branches. They use site-to-site VPN to access each other's data. And to conclude, overall, right, let's talk about the uses of VPN, or basically the advantages, right? The uses of VPN here. Here first, your anonymity, right? So what happens is your IP is masked or spoofed, right? IP spoof is happening, so your geolocation is protected and all your private data is encrypted, so your anonymity on the web is preserved, thus giving you a better privacy and security. And now you can access firewall blocked content, right? Any regional based content, anything that you wouldn't normally be able to access just by using your own public Wi-Fi. And that's pretty much all the uses of VPN. And I hope this video was really informational.
And I hope the videos help. I know, providing a few different ways to look at the topics is always good. Just looking at wireless security, there's WEP that we don't use anymore. We use either WPA, and the latest standard is WPA 3 on our wireless networks. Looking at, symmetric versus asymmetric encryption. We talked about symmetric, which is the same key is used to encrypt and decrypt. It's faster, but of course it's more difficult to distribute the keys because I have to give you, the key that I use to encrypt the data for sharing information. Asymmetric is what they came out with, where you use a private and a public key for encrypt and decrypt information. It's slower, but it is easy to distribute the keys if you have a key management, and it is, safer. And we'll go over that in just a slide here. One of the things, to go over is security digital certificate is used to deliver a trusted public key that can be used with assurance that belongs to the stated owner. So that's the most important thing. That's the reason why you need a CA or certificate of authority. It's used to authenticate the identity of the certificate's owners, the others. It's a document that contains the identity information and the public key. And so I can encrypt information with the public key, and only the person with the private key can decrypt it. So it makes it a little bit easier. The main types of digital certificates are the TLS SSL server. There's the client certificate. We have email certificates, code signing certificates, qualified certificate, and self-signed certificate that can be issued by the user. And so you can set this locally up on your, your own machine or in a network yourself, or use a public CA. So looking at the public key infrastructure, general approach for handling keys. Remember, we need a certificate of authority. It's a collection of the hardware, software policies, and procedures to manage digital certificates. And so this could be in your own network, or it could be, outside. A CT is certificate of authority, or to define trusted source. And I believe this is the last video, but going over what is a CA and a PKI. That'll be the last one, and then just a few slides after that.
Welcome to Tech Talk. Today's topic is public key infrastructure. Before we finish, you're going to know what it is, why it's important, and how it works. And with me is Jeff, the security guy. I want to explain why I wanted to pick up this topic. Last week, I was setting up a website, and I wanted to get a lock icon that people expect in the web browsers, right?
Sure.
Because if you don't see that, in fact, some web browsers, they put up a warning. They say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? This could be sketchy, right? And so I was going through those steps, and I pretty much just followed a run book. And that involved first generating like a public and private key. And then from there, I created a certificate request, which I sent to a certificate authority. And then finally, I got my certificate, okay? Which I then installed on the web server. But I really didn't understand how it worked. And so could you explain that to me?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that was happening when you did this is you generated this key pair, a public and private key. Well, there's this thing that we call asymmetric cryptography. Asymmetric because there's two keys involved. They're mathematically related with this special property that whatever you do with one of the keys, you can only undo with the other. So if you encrypt the message with one of the keys, then you can only decrypt the message with the other, and vice versa. Then what you're doing is you arbitrarily choose one of those and say, this one is my private key. I am going to guard that like the keys to Fort Knox. It's going to be super secure. I'm not going to tell anyone.
In my case, I ended up putting it in as a root user. It was only accessible that way.
Sure. That's a typical way if you're storing it from a software perspective. An even more secure way to do it would be to store it in hardware on a secure enclave, a special chip that never even exposes the key to the storage.
Or even the admin
memory.
For that matter.
Exactly. No one can see it. It stays only inside there, and all of its operations are performed in the secure chip.
Got it. So let's go on then.
So there's a private key. That one you keep, totally secret. The public key is just the opposite. You tell the entire world. You don't care. Who knows what your public key is? Because the beauty of asymmetric cryptography is that even if someone knows this, they have no way to reverse engineer practically to get to that. So giving that public key information out basically tells the world how they can communicate with you, but doesn't reveal anything about your private key.
A little true confession here. I have to admit that I always thought a public key was just doing for decryption, and the other was used for encryption.
Yeah.
You're saying that's not true?
It's not true. It's a reasonable assumption, but it's not the case. In fact, the math behind this doesn't know which one you chose as public or private. It doesn't care. You encrypt with one, you decrypt with the other. And it's an arbitrary decision at the time that you designate which is which.
Before we leave that, what would symmetric encryption come into play here?
Yeah, so symmetric cryptography is similar but different. With asymmetric, we have two keys. That's the asymmetry. One's public, one's private. With symmetric, we have only one key. That one key is used to encrypt. That one key is used to decrypt.
Does double duty. Okay.
Exactly. So it's symmetric. It has symmetry. It's the same key on both sides. If I send you a message that I've encrypted with this particular symmetric key, the only way you can decrypt it is to use the very same symmetric key.
But that presents a problem for me getting that symmetric key to you, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. So the advantage to symmetric key cryptography is that it's relatively efficient. It's fast compared to asymmetric, which is much, much slower. The downside with symmetric is exactly the problem you said. If I generate a key and I encrypt a message with it, now I need a way for you to know what that key is. And if I just sent you the key in an email, someone might intercept it. If I come up with some other kinds of means to send that to you, then there are all different kinds of problems. So that's why we use asymmetric cryptography as a way to communicate and transmit the symmetric key.
Oh, I see. So, for example, if I want to get you the symmetric key, I first encrypt it with an asymmetric key, send that to you, and then you can decrypt it with my public key.
Exactly.
And then I see, and then you have that symmetric key that we can then use to do fast exchanges.
Exactly.
Okay.
So this is why you can use both and each one for what it's good for. So the PKI, the public key infrastructure part, refers to this asymmetric. And what that really solves for us is the key distribution problem that was left over by using symmetric key cryptography.
Okay, great. I got that. So I have that now, my public-private key. I've done my certificate request, which has a bunch of information like, the website you're going to use, the admin contact information, stuff like that. I fill out that certificate request, and it goes to a certificate authority. And I get finally my certificate. What is going on in this certificate that is going to work back on my web server? What's going on behind the scenes?
So it's important to understand that the main thing that's in your certificate is this, your public key. That's the information, and the certificate is the way of conveying that. The certificate is a way that is a trustworthy way of conveying to the world what your public key is, because if I want to send you that message that only you can get, then I've got to encrypt it with your public key. But how do I know what your public key is? I'm going to take it from your certificate.
And the certificate authority, which was given my public key, how do they verify, like when I create my web browser, how does it verify that this actually came from them?
Yeah, so it's going to ask a bunch of questions, and it's going to populate the certificate with your answers to those questions. But ultimately, if the certificate authority, this guy right here, that we refer to as a trusted third party, the certificate authority is someone that you trust and someone that I trust. So I don't have to trust you, I just have to trust the certificate authority that the certificate it gave me is in fact yours.
When you click that lock icon, it actually shows you a list of all the authorities that were used to authenticate that, and shows a chain of
trust. Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Because you may have multiple certificate authorities. This certificate authority is trusted by another, and so forth. As long as all of those chain of certificate authorities trust each other, then the certs that they issue will be trusted as well.
And I don't have to go back to the certificate authority for each browser request, right?
In fact, you don't. That's the beauty of this. You could store all of these in a central database, and that could be at the certificate authority, but it doesn't have to be. You could, in fact, store these certificates anywhere. I could send it to you in an email. It doesn't matter how I get it to you, as long as I get it to you. The information in here is secure, and we know it's secure because it was vouched for by the CA.
So it had a signature on it.
That's where we get this thing we call a digital signature.
Right. I've heard that phrase used quite a bit. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. So with a digital signature, that's the way the CA, once it's been satisfied that this is in fact your actual cert, and that is in fact your public key, and you are in fact who you claim to be, then the CA will basically sign that all of these things are true. The way it does that is it runs a special algorithm against the cert, a thing called a hash. So we have a hashing algorithm that's run that summarizes the information here. If anything changes in here, the hash value would change dramatically. So the CA runs this hash to verify what the message is. Then it uses, guess what? Its private key to encrypt that hash value.
Which I can then decrypt with?
Yes.
The public key.
Exactly. You know the CA's public key because it's baked into your browser in advance. So that's how the whole process bootstrapped. And so we're using the same techniques that we're using to communicate the keys. We're using that same PKI infrastructure in order to do digital signing and in order to create a system of trust.
I think we've covered it now. That was the how, the why, and the what. So there it is. We're going to wrap on that. If you'd like to see more tech talks, maybe with Jeff or on other topics, be sure and leave us a comment below. And also, please remember to subscribe so we can keep bringing you cool content like this. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this in the future,
IBM is really good with their explanations. Like I said, then just a few slides. Oops. So we went over this in the slides, but best practices in Windows encryption techniques is to change passwords every 6 months. Don't write down your passwords. I mean, really 6 months? I mean, I'm thinking maybe, I don't know, monthly, 45 days. export recovery keys to removable media, store your recovery information from EFS or BitLocker in a separate location. What happens, if you have access connecting to volume, encrypt your My Documents folders for all users, never encrypt individual files, always do it at the folder level, and have 2 or more recovery agent accounts per organizational unit. We don't want to put ourselves in an encryption corner. Designate 2 or more computers for recovery. Avoid using principal files. Use multi-factor authentication, especially using BitLocker. Store recovery information in Active Directory. Disable standby mode for portable computers, and require strong passwords for all VPN connections. Use the strongest level of encryption for your VPN. Use SSTP for VPNs. Disable the SSID broadcasting for wireless networks, especially, at work, there's no reason to broadcast your network. Sometimes you do a guest, wireless broadcasting. Never use WEP for wireless networks. Always use DPA. Trust only certificates from your trusted CPA or trusted sites. So in summary, we went over BitLocker, BitLocker to Go, went over EFS, went over secure communication protocols, security certificates, and the public key infrastructure. So I hope you appreciated the videos and the overview, and look forward to discussions. And like I said, the labs are really good in this class, so make sure you're getting those. If you have any questions, email me. I check my email every day, and hope you have a great week.